Iván, please. Good evening. Thank you so much.
Portuguese, I'm sorry for that. I have a presentation. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, I'm Iván Carrino, I come from Argentina. I will speak in English because I think that's the best way we can communicate and I can show you my ideas. Let me start by thanking Instituto de Estudios Empresariais for this invitation. Victoria, Fernando Ulrich, Elio Beltrao, two Brazilian rock stars of liberalism. They are giving a lot of prestige to my panel. I hope I live up to the expectations. And I also want to thank Roberto, Andre, Amanda, and Pedro, the people who helped me here in my accommodations. I will tell you a sad story, which is the story of Argentina, but it might have a happy ending, as in the movies. And I'm not going to tell you the long-run sad story that we have, you know, that when we were very rich back in those days. The sad story, it's only our last 20 years. And you know what? You're going to have to wait for me for 1 second. I can continue now. Okay, welcome. There you go. Well, I have divided my presentation in 4 chapters. The first one will be very brief. It's just a comment on how the world, how we are in the world. Then we'll speak about Argentina thoroughly. And then we're going to get into our political situation. It's very important to talk about that over here in the Forum Da Liberdade, because maybe we are experiencing a rise of libertarian ideas once again. So, where are we living? What is our context? Okay, it started in 2020 with COVID-19 in something I call the Great Exaggeration or the Great Overreaction. That's a book of mine published in 2021. I think that the remedy put to cancel the disease was even worse than the disease, okay? It generated the biggest economic crisis since the Great Depression in many countries. And to add insult to injury, the governments decided to pursue irrational fiscal and monetary policies. So now we are having the worst levels of inflation in the last 3 or 4 decades. Not in also in Argentina. And now, then the central banks, as Elio told you, is trying to raise rates in order to control inflation, but that might lead us, at least worldwide, to another financial crisis. And I think maybe Fernando will talk a little bit about that. What's the story of Argentina? I'm going to tell you how 21st century socialism was implemented in Argentina. In these latitudes, 21st century socialism was represented by Lula in Brazil and by Nestor and Cristina Fernández de Kirchner in Argentina, okay? Let's take a look at how does it look like, okay? Here we have public expenditure, how much it grew in our region. And you see that for the last 20 years, Argentina was the country that increased public expenditure the most. We are #1. We won the World Cup and we won the race of public expenditure, okay? The size of the government has grown the most in our country. I excluded Venezuela because of, you know, you understand the reasons. That's a lost case. This is the increase in our expenditure. It was around 20% of GDP. It went up to 40% in GDP in just 20 years' time, okay? Okay. Not only expenditure is the problem, it creates inefficiencies in the economy and it loads or charges the private sector with a heavy load to move. But the thing is that when you don't have resources to finance that expenditure, then you incur in budget deficits. And the deficit in Argentina, I mean, our situation went from a 4% to GDP surplus to an 8% deficit, of course, in 2020 because of the quarantines and the pandemic. But not curiously, 2 years before, we were running deficits of 7 or around 6% of GDP for 3 years in a row. And with no pandemic and with no war, just populism and just demagoguery, okay. And yet, what happens when you have a deficit and because in 2001, our government decided unilaterally to not pay any debt, and that was applauded. It received a standing ovation in Congress to default on our national debt. And because of that, we couldn't raise any debt. This was not, we could not finance it by raising debt. So what happened? We printed a lot of pesos. And as Elio was saying, to the surprise of no one, this is what happened. And you look at 2007, and you may think, oh, that's nothing, it's really short column. But it's 27% inflation, right? The worst inflation of Latin America, including Venezuela in that year. Of course, now we have 94. And today, monthly inflation was known, and it was 7.7%. We are around 105% inflation today, and the government cannot find the solution. Expenditure, deficit, inflation. But also, we tried with the debt. This is the accumulated inflation of only the last 5 years, from 2019. It makes me laugh when I read that our president, Alberto Fernandez, is getting together with López Obrador and with Lula from Brazil to think of common solutions to inflation. And you know, I mean, it's not that Mexico and Brazil are doing things perfectly, but in terms of inflation, Alberto Fernandez should come here and ask for advice and be schooled in what should be done. Maybe not to Lula, but maybe he can ask Roberto Campos Neto, right? What should we do with inflation? Thank you. Not only did we print a lot of pesos, we also tried to issue debt. And this, what you see there, is the country risk premium, right? If you're around 400 points, 300 points of country risk premium, you can raise debt, let's say, in a sort of sustainable way. Well, we are now around 2,000 points, 2,005 points. So we also, you know, we are in the middle of an IMF program. We also destroyed our financing sources, and we were at the verge of another default. And then the IMF came to the rescue, you know. Okay. What is the result of all this in the everyday life of an Argentinian? Well, this is the accumulated growth since 2013. To summarize this, our per capita GDP is 10% lower than in 2013. So we are heading for another lost decade in our economy. The pie that every socialist wants to cut and distribute is getting lower and lower. So we are getting, on average, poorer. And this is the growth rate for the last 10 years. I mean, the dark blue ones are the accumulated growth for the last 10 years. Argentina, with the biggest increase in public expenditure of the last 20 years, has the lowest growth rate of the last 10 years. We should talk to Keynesian economists and ask them to calculate the expenditure multiplier. Maybe they become libertarians. I'm sorry to say that Brazil is next to us, so obrigado Lula, obrigado Cristina, obrigado Dilma for all of this. Okay. And this is our wages. Measured in dollars, our wages have become 70% lower in just 5 years. I mean, the crisis is very hard, and people is tired. And when people are tired, this is what happens. I'll pass this. A major change in social and economic policy is preceded by a change in the climate of intellectual opinion, generated by circumstances such as economics. An intellectual wave will spread to the general public, and through that, then it changes political decisions. If you wonder who said this was Milton Friedman, and he was explaining how things can change in the political arena. And I think he was correct, and that thing is happening in Argentina now. Ideas are changing. People are looking for other explanations to our problems. And this is how the polls look for next election, which are going to happen in August. The one on the left is the Kirchnerist-Peronist coalition. It has, at the most, 30% of people wanting to vote for them. So 70% of Argentinians are not choosing Peronism. What are the other options? In the middle you have Juntos por el Cambio, that's the Macri party, Mauricio Macri, the ex-president. He didn't govern well, actually. But since the next president was even worse, then now people kind of look at him and think, okay, you were not that terrible, okay? And the third one is La Libertad Avanza, the party of Javier Milei. I think you know Javier Milei, don't you? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay, I don't want to be bad, but La Libertad Avanza is a really interesting phenomenon. Javier Milei is a really interesting phenomenon. I don't have a lot of time, so I will try to rush it a bit. But I would say this is a rise of libertarian populism. And you might think, well, but liberalism and populism, they are totally antonym, they are against each other, right? But if we read those people who inspire Milei, for example, Mary Rothbard. Do you know who Mary Rothbard is? Okay. In an article in 1990, Mary Rothbard said that the Hayekian model of spreading ideas was not working enough. It was okay to spread ideas, to tell the elite that they need to become more free market, but other things need to be done. And he recommended that the proper strategy for libertarians and paleos is a strategy of right-wing populism, to expose and denounce the unholy alliance between government and big corporations against the little men. And then he suggested that we needed to compromise with paleo-libertarians, and traditionalists, let's say more conservative people, in terms of family values, pornography, prostitution, or abortion. Those were the topics being discussed in that time. And there is another ideologue called Hans Hermann Hoppe, another Austrian, a sociologist, who kind of said that Marx was right. Where was Marx right? In the idea that the history of the world is a clash of classes. The only difference with Marx was that the exploiters are the political casta, and the exploitees, it's us, right? You who work and you try to make a living. And of course, Hoppe also has ultra-conservative views on many social issues, and he's a reference for the alt-right in the United States. So, in any case, and I go to my conclusions, it is a very interesting thing that 70% of voters are not voting for Peronism, and that almost 60% of voters have decided to choose some sort of free market coalition, either Milei or Juntos por el Cambio, okay? So, I have a moderately optimistic view for the future, and this is, Argentina is very cheap, that's another matter, but I have a moderately optimistic view because of this political landscape, and also because we're very cheap. The statist and socialist paradigm is coming down, and the political landscape shifted to the right, and that means that economic orthodoxy is coming. Thank God, finally, I'm so happy to tell you that. Are there any risks? I see two risks. The first one is that the measurements that will be taken don't give the benefits too fast. And you know that people are anxious. If they don't come too fast, maybe the temptation to go back to interventionism will come back. I will have 30 more seconds. And the second risk, of course, is that if the alliance with these conservative sectors, very traditionalists, is finally done, then we can gain some economic liberty, which is very important, and is the most important thing in Argentina now, but maybe at the expense of some other liberties, which I consider are fundamental for us to thrive as human beings, okay? I hope the costs are lower than the benefits, and thank you very much for listening.